Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Changing Minds podcast. My name is Owen Fitzpatrick, and I'm really delighted and very excited to introduce to you someone who is a very well-known name in the area of personal and professional development. Dr. John Demartini is a world-leading human behavioral specialist. He's a researcher. He's a polymath. He's a philosopher. He's an international speaker, a best-selling author, an educator, and the founder of the Demartini Method. Dr. Demartini has authored 40 books that have been translated into 39 different languages. And that, for anyone who's ever written a book, that's a massive amount. I've written 8 books. And to have written 40 books translated into 39 different languages is absolutely incredible. He's presented his insights alongside some of the world's most influential people, including Sir Richard Branson and Deepak Chopra. He's been awarded the IAOTP Top Human Behavioral Specialist of the Year, as well as the IAOTP Lifetime Achievement Award. His work is a summation of over 299 different disciplines synthesized from the greatest minds in most fields of study today. His extensive curriculum focuses on helping purpose-driven individuals master their lives so they're able to more extensively serve humanity with their inspired vision and mission. To find out more, and I'll be talking about this at the very end, check out www.drdemartini.com. Dr. Demartini has a lot of incredible books, a lot of great programs and courses that you can do, but we're really lucky to have him here. So, Dr. Demartini, you're very, very welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you. I was looking forward to it. Thank you for having me on your show.
So to start off with, would love to know a little bit about what kind of people do you work with and what kind of people do you help and what do you help them to do?
Gosh, I get asked that quite a bit. I've worked with all different types of people because it depends on what I'm doing, but I would say the majority of them are entrepreneurs that could be startup companies, it could be grand, big companies. They could be on a celebrated status, they could be on a new starting out thing, all different areas. But I also involve myself with education, so I'm also dealing with from youth and education and from small classes to students in small schools to universities. I've been blessed to work with celebrities, to work with politicians. Anything to do with human behavior, and anybody that wants to do something more extraordinary with their life and become more masterful in their life, I've had the opportunity to work with. And this is going on my 50th year. So I've been doing it a while.
I was just going to say you're bound to have, I suppose, learned so much from all of that experience. Now you do present a lot of different types of trainings, right? And I was just looking at some of your portfolio and some of the different courses you do, and obviously your background and knowledge is so extensive that you can teach a lot of different things. But one of the most prominent courses I think you do is the breakthrough experience. Could you share a little bit more about what you do with people? Like what kind of folks come to a breakthrough experience, and what is the experience that they have as they go through the event?
Okay, that's a good one. I've done that program.
Hello, sorry, Dr. Demartini. Sorry, you broke up there at the connection, I think, just after I asked the question.
Can you hear me again?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. I said I've had the opportunity to do that presentation or that program. It's a 2-day program, usually a weekend, 1,143 times. What do people get out of it? Ever since I was 17 years old and a gentleman inspired me to help me overcome some challenges in my life, I had a dream to help people break through whatever they perceived in the way of what they really would love to create in their life and achieve in their life. And I don't know what I'm going to get into every time. I just know that whoever's there, I'm committed to doing whatever I can to help them get clear about what they want to create and get a strategy in place and help them see whatever the obstacles they have as on the way, not in the way, to help them see the hidden order in their chaos and to turn their problems and challenges into opportunities. So I've given them methods and tools and whatever I've learned along the journey that can assist individually. So these are sometimes working one-on-one with people. Sometimes there's larger groups, and I have facilitators that I've trained that also help me. And I just do whatever it is. I mean, it could be a business endeavor. We had a gentleman that took a $3 million company to 1.3 billion as a result of the principles that he applied there. I've seen people who are celebrated in the music industry start there. I've seen people that want to have families that haven't been able to get pregnant, and they figured out what's going on and the strategy on do that. It has been, we had an 86-year-old the other day that says, now that I'm hitting puberty, I want to know what I want to do for the next 30 years. And he's putting out his goals. I've had young 4-year-olds in the program with their parents wanting to work on a sport. I've had the whole spectrum in there. 94-year-old women in there that came in there that said, now that my husband's died, I want to figure out how to find a younger man.
Wow.
I've had the whole gamut in there. I don't know what I'm going to run into, but all I know is that anything. Since I was 18, I had a dream of helping people master their lives. And mastery of life is to empower all areas of life, to wake up their genius, to help them grow in business if they want, to help them build wealth if they want, help them in their family relationships and communication, help them socially in their outreach and influence, physically, whatever inspires them. Anything in the areas of life that would be valuable to them, I'm interested in. I've been researching and gathering information, writing in those areas and helping people in that areas this is the 50th year.
Fantastic.
And so the breakthrough experiences, I love doing it, helping people break through whatever's in their way.
Fantastic. And in that, one of the methods that, again, I know that is a big part of a lot of the work that you have done over the years is the Demartini Method itself. Could you explain a little bit about what it is all about and how you developed it and how it works?
I started developing it when I was 18, actually. So that's a while back, 50 years. And it started by Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, a book I read called The Discourse on Metaphysics, and another book called The Principles of Quantum Mechanics by Paul Dirac, Nobel Prize winner. I was trying to devour those pieces of work, and it spurred inside me an idea of finding a hidden order in our life and on how to integrate pairs of opposites into a really integrated individual. See, we sometimes exaggerate ourselves and puff ourselves up with pride and become inauthentic. And we sometimes.
Sorry, Dr. Demartini, we just lost you there again. Bear with me. Continue from there.
Okay. I said when we go through life, sometimes we puff ourselves up with pride, and sometimes we beat ourselves up in shame. We exaggerate or minimize ourselves instead of be ourselves. And our authentic, most magnificent self is the one that's really us. And as long as we infatuate with others or resent others and put them in pits or put them on pedestals and distract ourselves with our amygdala, we're not going to live in our executive function. And so the Demartini Method is a series of questions that hold people accountable to discover the balance in what they see as imbalance that distracts them and helps them center themselves and get focused. So they're grateful for their life, they love what they're doing, they're inspired by a vision, they're enthusiastically taking action on it, where they're certain about where they want to go and they're present. So it's a science I've developed over these years. I've shared it with, gosh, I don't know how many millions of people are involved in it now, but it's a real powerful tool that they learn in the breakthrough experience, and they can use the rest of their life, and they use it over and over again on dissolving distractions and remaining inspired by what's deeply meaningful to them.
And what it's a phenomenal approach, but what makes it different? For example, why do a lot of the approaches out there not work when the Demartini Method does work? So what's the, I suppose, advantage of the Demartini Method over a lot of the traditional approaches to solving these problems most people have?
We have a cortical area of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is sometimes called the executive function center. And we have a subcortical area called the amygdala. The amygdala is the impulse instinct: seek pleasure, avoid pain, seek prey, avoid predator. It's the thing that distracts us from being present. And most people want a pleasure without a pain. They want a happy without a sad, a positive without a negative, a kind without a cruel, a one-sided world. And the pursuit of one-sidedness is futile. You know, if it's like trying to get a relationship to be only one-sided, it's not going to happen. And anytime you're pursuing something that's one sided, you have a fantasy, not an objective. And what I'm not interested in selling opium and selling people a fantasy. I'm interested in helping people be accountable about creating true objectives, mitigating the risks, preparing for what's inevitable, and having utility, not futility. So the method is a highly accountable system that holds you accountable to true objectives and not fantasies that distract. Because every time you go after a fantasy, you end up with a nightmare. There's a thing called eustress and distress. And eustress is when you're pursuing challenges that inspire you and you awaken creativity, innovation, and genius solving it. And that is something that actually builds wellness factors in the body and normalizes our autonomic function. But when we're looking for a fantasy, a pleasure without a pain, and ease without a difficulty, and trying to get a one-sided life, the other side smacks us and we get distress, which creates illness. And the illness is a feedback mechanism to let us know we're not pursuing something authentic and objective, we're pursuing a fantasy. And a great number of people don't know the distinction between a fantasy, a real goal, and objective. And so this method holds people accountable to setting real objectives. And that's what one of the reasons I'm an iconoclast to the fantasy promoting, the opium of the masses. It's what sells, but it's not what makes the difference. And I'm interested in holding people accountable. They're not liking it sometimes because they want the pleasure without the pain. But the reality of life is you get both. Yeah. You know, in the Buddhist teaching, the Buddha says the desire for that which is unobtainable and the desire to avoid that which is unavoidable is the source of human suffering. So yeah. I'm not interested in trying to avoid something and seek something, or getting rid of half of yourself, or trying to get rid of half of life. I'm interested in taking life on with full force, embracing whatever happens, using it to your advantage, seeing life on the way, not in the way, and doing something extraordinary that is really inspiring and meaningful to you, but not a fantasy. That's where my method's different.
I love that. And I love that particularly because, as you mentioned, Dr. Demartini, Buddhism's teachings, also the teachings of the Stoics, even, modern neuroscience, the importance of homeostasis and bringing things into balance, as opposed to leaning into, going overboard, trying to access whatever it is that makes us feel good at the time. I think that your method is so in line with that. I see a lot of what you do as sort of, you're almost the alchemist of negativity, or the alchemist of bad stuff. You transform everything into something that works for us, as you mentioned, utility as opposed to futility. One of the things that I've seen you talk about is it's almost like you've everything inside of you, good and bad. You talk about tragedy, heals self-righteousness, comedy heals self-wrongness. Could you talk a little bit more about that because I think it's a very, very powerful idea and something that really, as you pointed out, not very many people are talking about. And I'd love to hear you more discuss that, the importance of the good and the bad, because I think a lot of times we put our head in the sand and, don't take it out.
Well, the good and the bad are the illusions in the first place. We've all had situations we thought, this is a terrible event. And then a day, a week, a month, a year, 5 years later, we go, thank God that occurred, or thank you for that. And we have this idea, we got this new house, and we finally got this house of our dreams. And then 6 months later, year months later, go, this friggin' house, security, cost, maintenance, cleaning. So the illusion of good and bad is really part of the illusion that we get trapped in. And I'm a firm believer that every event is neutral till somebody with a subjective bias interprets it with a narrow-minded idea with some sort of moral hypocrisy about how it's good and bad, instead of how do I take whatever's happened and use it to the greatest potential. So I'm not interested in labeling it and spending time and putting a label on it. I'm interested in equilibrating the mind. So if you're infatuated with something and label it good, you're blind to the downsides and eventually going to discover it. And if you're resentful to something and unconscious of the upsides, you're going to eventually discover the upsides. So why have the wisdom of the ages with the aging process? You can have the wisdom of the ages without it by looking right now for the other side. That's what our intuition is really attempting to do, to take the unconscious, bring it conscious, and make you fully conscious. I'm interested in helping people being fully conscious, setting real objectives with both sides so they're prepared for what happens. You can't go to Mars thinking only positive thinking. You go to Mars by thinking, what could go wrong? How do we mitigate it? How do we solve it? How do we prevent it? What else could go wrong? And you hire people to think of everything that could go off and throw it off. You don't think only one side, you think both sides. And so I'm a firm believer in that, in balancing it. And so what people do, and when I was in practice many years ago, if I had a day that it seemed like it really was in the flow, right? And I get puffed up and I thought, oh, I'm amazing or whatever, and kind of get, inflated. I noticed when I would come home, I'd get nailed by my wife. She'd bring me back into authenticity because I'm up on this cloud here and puffed up a bit. And she'd pop my little pimple. And I thought, well, she's toxic and everybody knows how great I am and I'm all puffed up. But then I realized that as long as I get puffed up like that, I need something to get me back and down into authenticity because I'm not being me. And so I started asking questions before I went home. Who did I not remember the name of? What staff member did I not thank? What procedure did I overlook? And I asked self-governing questions to bring me back into the center. And then I would do that until I get a tear of gratitude. A tear of gratitude is the gratitude for the opportunity to be of service to people, have a staff that I have, and be able to do what I love doing. And when I did that and I went home, I got an amazingly loving wife. It was almost like a quantum entanglement effect on her. And then if I had a down day, because usually if I had a big day and I went home and I get nailed and then I had a down day the next day, I asked, who did I serve? What did I remember? What patient did I thank? Whose birthday did I remember? And I'd lift myself up until I got a tear of gratitude. And I did not leave the office until I self-governed myself back into authenticity and gratitude for being of service. And my business stabilized and accelerated. Beforehand, it was all over the place, volatile. Mm-hmm. And so I realized that if I don't govern myself by listening to my physiology and inner psychology and intuition, the outer world, sociology, and the outer events in life, tragedies and comedies, come in to equilibrate us, to make us authentic. Everything that's going on in our life is guiding us to authenticity and liberating us from the infatuations where we're blind to the downsides and the resentments that we're blind to the upsides, and making us fully aware. So I really believe that everything that's going on in life is guiding us to authenticity and liberating us from the incomplete awareness and helping us become mindful about life. And so that's why I'm grateful for life. And I love teaching people and helping people take whatever they've been through, navigate through it in a new perspective with the Demartini Method, see it completely on the way, and be liberated and not have baggage stored in their subconscious mind, causing impulses and instincts and fears and fantasies, but get present and do something extraordinary on a daily basis. That's what I love doing.
I mean, that's brilliant, Dr. Demartini. It resonates very much for me in terms of the work that I do. I would speak quite a lot internationally, and you get obviously the highs of walking off stage, people come up to you, makes you feel so good about yourself. But I also, to your point, similar to your experience with your wife, it's such a different experience because you have people that see you on a day-to-day basis, and you've all this adoration, which can be very easy for you to get addicted to or to fall into. And then you juxtapose that with the other side. So I really love everything you've said there, because I've seen myself make the same mistake many times, and it creates, if not the ups and downs of the business, certainly the ups and downs of my own psychological health. So exactly. I think it's phenomenal. In terms of,
I always say,
go ahead.
I'd say bipolar condition is a byproduct. Bipolar condition is a byproduct of monopolar addiction. As long as we're addicted to praise, criticism is going to hurt. Criticism is your friend. It calms, it teaches you how to communicate effectively in other people's values with respect. It teaches you how to come off a high horse and project your values and expect others to live in your values. It teaches you how to be authentic. It's not a negative thing in the world. It's a gift. It's a feedback system. Everything is a homeostatic feedback system. We have homeostasis inside if I went through all the homeostatic mechanisms of the body, we could be here for days. And there's homeostatic mechanisms in society, and there's homeostatic mechanisms in the family. There's homeostatic mechanisms in our psychology, the neurotransmitters. Everything is guiding us to authenticity and a profound capacity to do something magnificent with our life. Once we see life through those eyes, it's an amazing experience called life. Amazing.
I love it. I really do. And again, it reminds me of the the neurotransmitter. You mentioned neurotransmitters, dopamine, and how a lot of the research we've looked at now is that's exactly how it works. Dopamine's job in many ways isn't to make it so that we're getting more and more and more all the time. It's also to create that homeostasis, which is why it gets lower and higher. It's necessarily trying to balance our own desires. But one thing that I wanted to know is you also talk about seeing your faults in other people. And I think this is the same kind of principle, or at least related to what you've just been speaking about. Can you talk about the benefits and how this works? Because I think this is so useful for negotiating for influence, for relationships, especially. I'd love to know more about that.
Well, first of all, I started on the journey of that back in my 20s, because I noticed that whenever I was emphasizing something to somebody and really emphasizing something, I was talking to myself. Chomsky said that language wasn't just for other people. Language is also for you to hear what you say to people. And then I started to realize, the things that are pushing my buttons that other people are doing, why do I have a button on it? So I went ahead and did a preemptive strike. I went to the Oxford Dictionary, and I went through, it's the biggest dictionary I could find at the time. And I went through and underlined every possible human behavioral trait that a human being could have. And I literally calculated 4,628 traits. And outside the trait where I'd underlined it in that dictionary, I put the individual who I thought was the most extreme example of that trait. Who did I know that expresses that the most? And I put their initial out there. Then I went one by one, and people are thinking, this guy's neurotic. Well, I was curious about it. And then I went and asked, where and when do I display and demonstrate that same behavior? And who do I do it to? And who perceives me that way? And I went through every one of those traits, took months, and went through each of those traits. And I found that I had all 4,628 traits. I was nice at times, mean at times. I was nice as a pussycat. You support my values, I'm nice as a pussycat. I can be mean as a tiger at times. I was honest, I was dishonest, I was thoughtful, thoughtless, caring, uncaring. I mean, I went through everyone. I was deceitful, I was projective, I betrayed in people's values and perceptions. I had to own it all. And I finally realized that I had all those traits. If I really want to self-inspect and be honest with myself and do real self-evaluation, I got to be honest about who I am. So I did all those behaviors. And then I realized that the traits that I thought were bad traits also had benefits. I watched this person really had a father that was really tough on him, right? Really mean. And they'd say, well, he's a mean father and everything else. And that guy became one of the biggest entrepreneurs and went out and did something amazing in the planet. I was also seeing people that have been overprotected and oversupported and go, oh, I had a nice parent and everything else. And then they were basically dependent and didn't do much with their life. So sometimes what we think is mean is actually nice. And sometimes we think is nice is actually mean. And we label these things instead of look at both sides of these things. And so I went in there and I found out where I had them all. And then I asked if I thought it was a negative trait, what were the upsides to it? If I thought it was a great trait, what were the downsides? And I leveled it out until I saw that every trait is necessary. And if I went back and read Sumerians and Egyptians and the Greeks and stuff, these behaviors were around at the time. They're not gone. They're not extinct. If a trait is here and it's here for a reason, it serves. So how does it serve and how do we use it? And when do we want to use it? And I finally realized that I don't need to get rid of any part of myself to love myself. So that was the first realization. And then I found out that whatever I saw in somebody else that pushed my button was only because I was too proud or too humble to admit I had that. But once I looked carefully and asked, where did I do it? When did I do it? Who have I done it to? Who perceives me that? I found out that I didn't find any traits in anybody else that I didn't have. And it was stated in biblical writings in Romans. I remember it said something to that effect. And even Putin yesterday going after Biden, which is quite a funny one. There's a clip on YouTube that just came out yesterday that was about, hey, Biden, whatever you're saying about me is what you do. And he points out where what he's judging is inside himself. Now, I'm not supporting Putin by any means, but at the same time, he was making a point about that principle. So I'm a firm believer. I've been teaching the breakthrough experience for over 33 years. And I'm certain that you won't find a trait in other people that you don't have, or you won't react. If you react to it, you got it. If you resent something in somebody, it's because you're feeling ashamed of you doing it in the past, and they're now reminding you of it. It's bringing it out. You want to avoid them so you don't have to face that part of yourself, because our amygdala wants us to be proud not shamed. It wants to hide that part. And it wants to show off the part we're all proud of in this moral hypocrisy. But if all of a sudden you see somebody you admire, it's because you're too humble to admit what you have, but you have the trait. I take celebrities that want to go to the next level in their singing career, acting career, whatever, and take somebody that they admire in their life, they think is an amazing performer that's beyond them. And I ask, what exactly is the specific trait, action, inaction do you perceive in them that you admire most? Great, we identify it. And then we go to a moment where and when you display that trait, and go to another moment. We just keep digging and digging and digging and digging until we find out that they have the same behavior in another form in their value system, not that person's value, but their own value system. And they're not missing any of those traits. And the moment they do, they realize whatever they do, I've got it too. They don't have to sit and subordinate and minimize themselves to them anymore. They level the playing field, and their own productivity and their own value of themselves just went up. And when the second you value yourself, so does the world. So it's a very powerful tool. The Demartini Method is what this is part of the Demartini Method.
Fantastic. And again, I think this is it. I heard a thought leader, Lewis Mocker, talk quite a lot about your work, which is where I got a lot more information than just in the books. So one of the things that I've heard him mention that you talk about is different universal laws. Obviously, we don't have a massive amount of time to go into them, and I'm sure it takes quite a while. But could you mention a couple of the, for you, universal laws that people need to be more aware of that you think would be the most useful for the listeners?
Yeah, the most significant, one of the most significant of universal laws is called the law of the one to many. The law of the one and the many. And people go, well, what exactly does that mean? Well, I've studied 300 different disciplines. I've yet to see one discipline of 300 that didn't apply this law. This law applies in it. It works on the micro, the macro, and anywhere in between. So let's explain it. Let's take gravity. You start out with an infinite number of radii, many, and it comes down into one point source, one. And light, you start from a point source and you go out to infinite many. So this is part of it. Gravity and radiation is a law of the one to the many and many to the one. You also have this in the sense of sociology. Sociology, when you're with a social structure, you have a monarchy and a democracy. And if you get too far in democracy, you get everybody's trying to do it. You can't get any decisions made. So somebody rises out of it, out of the many, one will rise out of it and make a friggin' decision. And over here, if you get one and they don't care about the many, you get a revolution to get it and disperse it back into the many. So if you try to go towards a monopoly of one or try to go towards a polypy of many, nature tends to put those back into equilibrium because the law of the one to many says from the one comes the many and from the many come the one. So you can see this also in chemistry. You'll see that the body is automatically having nucleophilic substitution, which is seeking and avoiding. It's a chemical game of Coulomb's forces in chemistry. You'll see it also in the dating process. If you're dating many people and you're looking for that special one, and then once you get the one, you're wondering about the many. The law of the one to many applies in every field, in calculus and differentials, which is going from one to many, and integrals from many to one. Every field, social structure, economics, business, even the spiritual area, the theology area, you've got one soul, according to theologians, and many personas and masks that you wear wraps around it, the pairs of opposites. And that gives rise to another principle, which is called the pair of complementary opposites. And this goes back to Heraclitus and goes back to Zeno and many others. And this is the idea that there's never one without its opposite. All pairs of opposites are born together. You see this at the quantum vacuum level. You see particles and nanoparticles coming out of the world of uncertainty. At a quantum level, Planck's level. You see this at the astronomical level. For every time a star goes into a black hole, it starts radio jet and stimulates new star formation. There's always a pair of opposites going on in nature, and it's part of the law of conservation. The conservation and Nether's theorem of symmetry and conservation are derived from this law of one to many and the law of the pair of opposites. So they're entwined, they're derivatives of each other, but they're the most universal laws you'll find.
Love it. And I think, again, the main reasons that they're so insightful is the practical application of them, which, there's so many, I suppose, ways that you can use this law to be able to think in more effective ways. And again, it comes back down to the balance, the equilibrium that we've been talking about. So I love this. You also have a technique that you, at least you had in your book, you use called the love list. Could you just explain how that works?
Well, many people write down fantasies in their life. They write down something that will give them immediate gratification and pleasure, they think. And many of those things are amygdala driven compensations for not being authentic. In other words, we meet somebody, we think, oh, we admire them. We go, oh, I would like to do that. And it's not really part of our own structure, our value structure to do it, but we think about it. Like fantasizing we're going to be wealthy when we don't really have a value on investing money and buying assets and building the potential for that. So we set up fantasies, and these fantasies are the very source of our nightmares. Our addiction to fantasy is what creates our fear of the nightmare. So it's basically making sure that we apply a balanced orientation if we really want to have a fulfilled life. You know, if imagine going into a relationship and it says, well, I only want the positive side, I don't want the negative side. If she ever shows me a negative side, I'm out of here. Well, you're now pursuing a fantasy, a hedonistic pursuit of one side and not an objective pursuit of both sides. It's not obtainable. You won't ever be in a relationship. In fact, some of the people I find that are constantly going from relationship to relationship are usually looking for fantasies of one side, and the second the other side shows up, they're out of there. And that's not the way to master life. And the same thing for themselves. They're trying to get rid of half of themselves and only put on a facade of one side, which eventually gets busted. Almost all our heroes, eventually we find the villain hidden inside the hero. I'm a firm believer that everybody's got a hero and villain inside. And I guarantee if we watched you 24 hours a day with a drone over you and 24 hours a day and videotaped you and edited out, we can make a hero out of villain out of every human being. So I'm not interested in trying to get rid of half of yourself. I'm interested in loving all parts of yourself and teaching how to use each part wisely, because there's a place for every part. I think it was in a biblical writing, it was Ecclesiastes 3. It says there's a time for everything under the sun. There's a time and season for everything. And I believe that that's time to appreciate your whole life. Otherwise, you're going to be caught in moral hypocrisies created by individuals that have been wounded, projecting an unrealistic expectation on society, self-depreciating people trying to be something they can't be, futility, and then wondering why they're not fulfilled in life. I'm not here to try to get rid of any part of you or anybody else. I'm interested in finding out how all of you serves me and how I can serve you that way. And if you have a sustainable, fair exchange, when you have equanimity within you and equity between you and others, you have the greatest potential to make the greatest difference in business, greatest economic return, greatest stable in relationship, greatest social influence. So I'm a firm believer in owning all parts of yourself and loving the whole picture.
It strikes me that exactly what you've said is even more important in the modern day with the media, with the social media, with polarization, with echo chambers, with how, especially in America, if you take the United States of America, it seems to me that what you're talking about here is so critical for more people to embrace, to be able to help overcome this polarization that seems to be happening politically. You know, it's even COVID. I mean, wherever you look, everything's being politicized and polarized. Do you see that as potentially what people need more of? And if people were able to see that what I see in a Democrat or Republican is also in me, you know, we get away from the good versus bad, you know, the good versus evil type mentality. Do you see a place for what you do, your life's work, to mend those kind of bridges and to help bring us closer together?
Well, I don't try to mend it so much as, you know, let me use this analogy. When you're in first grade, you go to first grade or maybe elementary school, you probably eventually go through some sort of little science class and you look at the front of the room and you see these little atoms, pictures of atoms, and you see hydrogen all the way to uranium on a little chart at the top of the class above the blackboard or something. And then you have these little plastic balls and sticks, and you put these bonds together and little atoms, and they teach you an atom is a little ball, and you connect it by a bond, which is a stick. And you see these little spheres. And you in elementary school assume an atom is a sphere, a little ball. And you think of little balls, kind of like a model that goes back to Democritus or Leucippus. Now, when you go to high school, you go, oh, wait a minute, there's a Bohr model. And the Bohr model says, well, actually, it's not exactly. There's shells of orbiting electrons around this atom, and there's protons and neutrons in the center, and there's this Bohr model. And they go, oh, well, okay, it's still got a shell to it. It's kind of like a sphere, but it's really made out of this little solar system looking thing. And then you go to college and you wait a minute, that's not it either. It's a probability distribution based on complex mathematics by a Schrodinger equation, and it has quantum numbers, and it's just probabilities of where they are, and the distribution of the electron around it makes these things called orbitals, pi orbitals, etc. And then you kind of go, well, wait a minute now. That means it's a point source sort of electron, but wait, it's got a wave in a particle nature. So is it really there? Is it an infinitesimal? Is it something? And then we go on to college, we find out we don't know really what the hell it is. It's still a mystery. We start to find out a neutron and a proton, which are made out of quarks, are also made out of mesons, and it's a surging interpenetrating web of uncertainty. And then you can think, well, I had to be taught that illusion until I could be ready to that level of abstraction mathematically. So the same thing in life. You got people that are being taught the illusion until they're ready for truth. And the illusion is the polarity of avoid pain, seek pleasure, avoid, punishment, seek reward, avoid negative, seek positive, avoid evil, seek good. That's the lowest, most banal level of consciousness. And that is mass media, mass marketing, mass politics, mass religions love to go in there. If you do this, you're going to go to heaven. If you don't, you're going to go to hell. Okay, those are the most banal constructs of human psychology. The highest level of this is a mathematical abstraction of an elegant beauty and symmetry of existence, and seeing the pairs of opposites, seeing the one-to-many manifest so beautifully. Inside your body, you have mitosis, where you take and organize structures. You have apoptosis, where you disorganize structures. One, many. They're in perfect order. They have to build and destroy in order to have an evolution to the body and to have metabolic equilibrium and to have life to adapt. And in society, the same thing. You've got a set of values. You've got people with the opposite set of values. If one rises, an opposite rises. The law of heuristic escalation, it's called in chaos theory. These mechanisms here are keeping a metabolic equilibrium on the planetary level in order for us to adapt to a changing astronomical environment. So if you understand that and understand the beauty and the elegant, the symmetry of that, and realize that's really what love is, the symmetry and synthesis and synchronicity of all pairs of opposites, you now have a different perspective, and you don't react to the misinformation easily that's thrown in the media. The mass media isn't designed for truth. It's designed to sway and to sell. And it's opium of the masses. So I pay little attention to that. When I'm on the mass media, I share these principles. So I'm assuming that people, if they hear that, sometimes they're shocked because I don't match exactly what everything is being. They always want you to take a side. If you don't stand for something, you fall for anything, right? Yeah. And they always want you to be right and wrong and bad and good. I remember one time many years ago, I went to a fundraising thing. You donate a $10,000 deal for this presidential candidate, right? And then the following night, I went to the complete opposite candidate and did a $10,000 over on this other side to this other one, just so I can meet the people. And these people condemn these people condemn these people. And I saw the beauty of both those people. And I saw the illusions of each of those, and I transcended it. And they were wanting me to be on a side. And I said, I'm not interested in being polarized and supporting and challenging and creating an autonomic imbalance. I'm interested in appreciating that both of you are necessary in a big picture to keep accountability on planet Earth.
Wow. I've never heard it explained that wonderfully before. So I'm definitely going to be playing back that part myself and listening to it a few times because I think there's real genius in there. Thanks for sharing. I've a couple more questions and then I've a quick fire round, if that's okay. Really quick questions and stuff before we wrap up. Is that okay with you?
Whatever. I'm inspired by being on your show, so thank you.
Great. So first of all, one of the things that I know you were on this, the movie The Secret, the notion of the law of attraction. I know that there's a lot of research out there about the power of beliefs, the power of expectation, the expectation effect, as they call it, everything from placebos and nocebos to, the research out there that shows our expectation of how much we exercise and whether stress is good or bad for us. All those factors make a difference. What I'm curious about, and I'd love you to share your thoughts on it, is around the power of belief. On the one hand, we have the power of, let's say, positive thinking, the power of believing that this is going to happen and believing in yourself and believing in a good future, that things will work out, believing in your health and visualizing it. On the other hand, there's the power of the negative thinking where you lower your expectations. And sometimes that can actually be more advantageous to you because when you lower your expectations, you almost always exceed them, which builds your confidence, et cetera, et cetera. Could you talk a little bit about from your point of view, When does the power of belief, the expectation effect, work best? And when does, going the opposite direction, being able to go and maybe lower those expectations or thinking a bit differently about it, or just your overall opinion about that if you disagree with any of the premises of what I've said?
Okay, that's a great question. First of all, I said that there's a prefrontal cortex executive function, which is more objective and neutral and has self-governance over the amygdala, which is the subcortical area. It's part of the limbic system. And the amygdala is, again, avoiding pain, seeking pleasure, avoiding shame, seeking pride, avoiding predator, seeking prey, avoiding anything that challenges your values, seeking anything to support your values. It's the hedonistic pursuits. It's the pleasure principle by Freud. Somewhere in between, there's a gradation that many people fall under. If they're in the bottom level, because they're not doing what's really highest on their value. See, if every human being has a set of priorities, a set of values, a hierarchy of values in their life, a value structure. Whenever they're doing something that's high in their value, they're spontaneously inspired and fulfilled from within. And whenever they're doing lower value systems, they need extrinsic motivation to do it. Punishment if you don't do it, reward if you do it, to get you to do it. So anytime you're doing low priority things because you're subordinating to the world and thinking you need to fit in instead of doing what you really are inspired to do, you go into the amygdala. And when you do, you look for a pleasure and try to avoid a pain. And so you set up positive thinking and try to avoid negative thinking. And that's probably the most basic banal state, if you will. The problem is that it doesn't do it. I spent 2 years proving absolutely that that's an incomplete approach. But people want the opium. They want the dopamine high. They want the quick, estrogen stimulation and the endorphins coming off that they temporarily think that as long as I'm in that fantasy, I'm going to get that. I'm feeling high. And then when they get slammed by the distressing opposites, they get low and then they beat themselves up. And they get caught in what I call a vicious cycle of thinking they're successful or thinking they're failure. And the addiction to success brings more fear of failure. Anytime you seek something, you fear its loss. Anytime you try to avoid something, you fear its gain. So anytime you're living in that zone of the amygdala, you're going to be living in anxieties and fantasies, because the fantasy breeds the fear of the nightmare of the loss, and the nightmare breeds the fantasy of getting away from it. And so we split ourselves up into fantasy and nightmares, pleasures and pains, and polarize the unpolarizables, divide the indivisible part of our nature. When we live by our highest values, we go into the objective center where we integrate and embrace both sides equally. See, if you think you're successful, you actually tend to set too big a goal in too short a time frame and then get humbled. And you think you're down and in a failure, you tend to set smaller goals in longer time frames to get up. And those are feedback systems, a depurposing and a repurposing feedback system to get you into authenticity, to set real goals in real times that are real objectives that you've prepared for both positives and negatives of, like the Stoics and Marcus Aurelius taught. And you've integrated those two sides and you're going after real objective. So to me, that is it. Now, every time you set a goal that is objective and you achieve that, your belief and confidence in yourself goes up, your certainty level goes up. And anytime you go and try to get one side without the other, your belief and confidence goes down. So you automatically have uncertainty when you're in your amygdala, and you have more certainty when you're in your executive function. That's why all of the physiology is pointing you and homeostatically trying to get you back into authenticity, where you have an executive function and governing yourself. There's a glutamate, which is a primary facilitator transmitter, and the GABA, which is a primary inhibitor, and N-acetyl aspartate, which is another one of the transmitters that are there to literally dampen the volatilities of the amygdala by living by priority. The most significant thing a person can do to master their life and to not have the vicissitudes and the volatilities and instabilities of the amygdala is to prioritize their life and do the highest priority things on a daily basis, delegating all lower priority things and getting into the executive function, because the blood glucose and oxygen activates that area the second you live in highest priority and you have the most fulfillment. The amygdala is a byproduct of an unfulfilled life, looking for immediate gratification to temporarily eat to fill that which is feeling empty. So I'm a firm believer that your belief goes up and your certainty goes up if you live by true objectives, not by fantasies of just positive thinking.
Wonderful. In terms of this podcast, this is called Changing Minds. And I get a lot of people that look for their therapists or coaches that are looking to be able to help people to change their minds. What are the main ways that you think people change their beliefs, their fundamental, like you could call it beliefs or mindsets or way of thinking about the world? How are you, like, obviously part of the work that you do involves getting people, opening people's eyes, getting them to see what they haven't seen before. So, what are the most important things you think that need to happen for a person to change their beliefs?
That's a great question. You know, Aristotle had a thing which he called the golden mean, which was the true virtue in between the vices of excess and deficiency. He had a chart on this. And the amygdala is the excess and deficiency. Because if you're infatuated with something and it's prey, you have a confirmation bias on the positives, a disconfirmation bias on the negative, a false positive on the positives, a false negative on the negatives. And you're conscious of the upsides and unconscious of the downsides, and you pursue it with an impulse. And it accumulates adrenaline to go after that prey and capture that and eat that thing. But what it is it's blind to the downsides, because when you're infatuated and you're after the prey, you're blind to the downside. You're completely unaware of what happens. Imagine if you had no predator and you had nothing but prey. You'd get gluttonous, fat, overweight, and lose your fitness. There is no predator. And if you have a predator, now you have a confirmation bias on the negatives and a disconfirmation on the positives, a false positive on the negatives and a false negative on the positives. And now you're skewed and you're blind to the upside to the predator. But the predator actually keeps you fit. Because if you had nothing but predator without prey, you'd end up emaciated and starved and not fit. But if you put the prey and the predator together in perfect balance, just like they show in chaos theory, you need support and challenge equally, you maximize fitness. Our fitness level, our belief and confidence levels are maximized when we have a perfect balance of support and challenge. Because support builds our pride, challenge brings us back in equilibrium, challenge puts us in shame, the support builds us back in equilibrium, and those two maintain equilibrium, if you're fully aware, to keep you authentic. And when you do, you have the highest degree of confidence in yourself when you're authentic, and have the highest degree of uncertainty and disbelief in yourself when you're striving for something that's unobtainable and trying to avoid that which is unavoidable.
Great. And so from an actual shift perspective, then what recommendations would you have, for example, from a therapeutic coaching practice, training, speaking, for those people that want to be able to shift the way in which people are thinking about themselves to the point? What would you suggest they do, given everything that you just so elegantly laid out there?
Well, anything that is polarized in your mind is stored in what they used to call the subconscious mind as excess facilitation and inhibition systems in the brain. The subconscious mind stores all impulses and instincts and all conscious and unconscious splits and polarizes us. It makes us unstable. If we can go and find out at the moment we're infatuated, what are the downsides? And the moment we're resentful, what are the upsides? In the moment of our perception, we extract the mean out of our existence. Extracting meaning out of our daily life and our existence is intuitively prompted questions, which I call the Demartini Method, to make us aware of the downsides of the thing we're infatuated with and the upsides of things we resent, and center ourselves so the world doesn't run us. Because anything we infatuate with occupies space and time in our mind and runs us. Think about the time you've been highly infatuated and you couldn't even sleep at night, or highly resentful and you couldn't sleep at night. Anytime you're highly polarized, your brain is on, it got a noise in it. And the signal from the real authentic self compared to the noise ratio is weak. But the moment you ask the question and see both sides and level the playing field and balance it, the signal comes through. And the signal is your authentic calling inside, your purpose and your mission in life, the thing you feel that you're inspired to do to make a contribution in a sustainable, fair exchange manner with people, which allows you the maximum productivity and in a sense, fulfillment. Every time we're infatuated with something, we minimize ourselves to the person we're infatuated with, and we have a disowned part, a void. Anytime we look down on someone, we exaggerate ourselves, we have a disowned part. We're too proud to admit what we see in them inside us. Those disowned parts are empty. That's why judgment leaves us empty. But when we love somebody, as Empedocles said in his time, a Pythagorean, if we love people, we have fulfillment. So I really believe that everything that's going on in our life is trying to get us to be aware of both sides, to extract meaning out of our existence, to be clear about our purpose and mission in life, and to love who we are, who we're working with, and the things that we're doing in this world. And I believe that that's where fulfillment comes from. And I think that if we ask questions that allow us to equilibrate the mind, which I've outlined in the Demartini Method. It's a very precise scientific series of questions that takes anything that you have in balance that's occupying your mind, that's all brain noise, that scatters you, distracts you, and centers you so you're now purposeful and inspired and grateful for your life and doing something you really love to do with more certainty and presence.
Wonderful. I mean, I have a million other questions, but I'll just get one more before we go to the quick fire round, if that's okay. I'd love you to share. You do a number of courses that I've seen. You know, the Anima, which seems a fascinating, session all about the soul. You have courses on financial success. You've got courses called Prophecy. Could you just talk through for any listeners out there that might be interested in learning more? We obviously know, thanks to you earlier on, about the breakthrough experience and the Demartini method. But in terms of some of the other courses, what should people know about them in terms of how they could benefit from those different trainings?
Well, I teach 80 different courses. Some of them are multi-weeks even. I even have a correspondence course that's 21 years. So I got a lot of stuff there for people if they're interested. I set out when I was 18 years old to master my life. And I learned from Zig Ziglar when I was 20, if I help other people do that, I get to do that. And so I'm both altruistically want to serve, but I also narcissistically want to master my own life, because Einstein said the greatest teacher is exemplification. If I exemplify a mastered life, an inspired life, a grateful life, and a fulfilled life, that's the teaching. That's the essence. Not just words, it's the living of it. So all the courses I do is for that objective. There's not one course that's not ultimately for that objective. So the program you mentioned, Anima, the people ask, is there a soul? You know, theologians like to think of there's a soul. What the heck is that? So I go back through the ages and go through all the people that have written about that and bring it up to date into neuroscience. What does that really represent? I call it the authentic self. I call it the true essence of your being. Not when you're exaggerating or minimizing yourself, but when you're actually being yourself, where you have tears of gratitude and grace for the opportunity to be who you are. So that's a program on authenticity, really. The program on the prophecy program it's some sort of religious program. People kind of think, oh, what prophecy? No, it's about you being a prophet of your own destiny and living by design, not by default. Most people are sitting there living under mommies and daddies and preachers and teachers and mores and conventions and traditions and living by social idealisms and being part of the herd, the collective consciousness, instead of actually being an individual hero, as Ernest Becker describes in his Pulitzer Prize winning book, The Denial of Death. The individual is an unborrowed visionary that Atlas Shrugged talked about. Giving us permission to be our authentic self is what I'm interested in. And so the prophecy program is how to master the 7 areas of life and the rules and the principles and methods that I've gathered over 50 years to assist people instead of having to reinvent the wheel, stand on my shoulders. I'm the neurotic guy that's been doing research all these years, thousands and thousands of texts. I've summarized it, and I can help people without a doubt save time and money and energy on mastering these games, mastering these 7 areas. So each of the programs that I do are designed for that objective. And wherever it's needed, it could be financial. The courses I do in finance, because so many people are impulsive, want a quick get rich scheme, want to quickly go and gamble instead of actually being methodical, patient, persistent, with a long-term focus on serving ever greater numbers of people and being rewarded economically by productivity investing and value investing. So I'm a firm believer in being methodical. I always say if you're bored, you're probably on track. If you're excited, you probably screwed up financially. So I'm not interested in quick get rich schemes. I'm not interested in gambling and trading and instant gratification. I'm interested in the science of building wealth. That's how I became financially independent. It's how I get to do the things that I love doing today. And I used to live on the streets. I was a street kid as a kid. So it doesn't because I had a golden spoon put in my mouth. It's because I found the principles that stood the test of time that lead to the outcome. So all the courses are designed to help you master you're a genius, wake up your international business if you want it, wake up your wealth if you want it, your relationship. I'm a firm believer you can have a global relationship and not be trapped in a little box in some suburb, a social influence if you want it, vitality if you want it, and be inspired and make some sort of inspirational movement on the planet. Anything that you want is available to you. And I'm certain that can be done. And these principles I know will stand the test of time. they've been working for thousands of people, and I know they've worked in my life. So it's just passing on what I've learned and what I get to live my life by.
Brilliant. We've got if anyone is interested, which I'm sure many of you are, check out www.drdemartini.com and you'll see Dr. Demartini's books and his courses, online courses, offline courses, like in person. Lots of great stuff there, as well as a great blog. Just to finish off then, Dr. Demartini, with a real quick fire round, I just asked a bunch of questions. It doesn't have to be your favorite, but it could be a favorite. So we'll start with your favorite or a favorite movie that you love.
Oh gosh.
That's why I say a favorite.
What popped in my mind? What popped in my mind was a little movie called October Sky, where a young boy wanted to work and build rockets, and his father was a miner, and the father was condemning it and saying, "No, you got to be a miner. That's who you are. That's your destiny." And his teacher was saying, "No, you've got skills. You got talents." And there's a conflict between the true self and the pressure from society and family, and how a boy never gave up on his dream and ended up eventually shooting rockets into space.
Love it.
I think that's worth watching because it's a metaphor for everyone's life, and it's an inspirational movie. And so that's what just popped in my head. I can't say that's number one, but that's what popped in my head, so I just shared it.
Again, TV series that you recommend, any that pops into your head?
Well, I wish I could say that I watch a lot of TV. I'm on TV more than I watch TV.
Okay. Well, then let's skip to a favorite book or great authors that are out there at the moment that you'd recommend people check out, besides obviously yourself.
There's 2 volumes making up one book that I recommend every human being, and that is Syntopicon Volumes 1 and 2 by Mortimer Adler. It's part of the Great Ideas of the Great Idea series, the great books from Britannica. And it's a synthesis over the last 2,700 years. It's a synthesis of the greatest minds who've written about the greatest topics that are most meaningful of human existence, condensed into 2 great big volumes. And I believe that a person can start there, and it's a PhD on life. So that's the books I tell people. All my students, I tell, get that book, start there, so you'll be prepared for what I'm going to be teaching you.
Fantastic. Just 2 more questions. Favorite artist or musician, or any great ones that you love?
Well, what just popped in my head as you say that, I love, when I went to the Prada Museum, I loved seeing Hieronymus Bosch, or whatever, if I pronounce that properly. I loved his surreal systems. And a friend of mine, Charles Billich, who's like the Salvador Dali of today, is still alive. And I loved his paintings. They're inspiring paintings, what he does. But I don't know, I think I've just going to the Louvre and going walk around, see the paintings of David and seeing the Mona Lisa and seeing all the paintings at museums. I love going to museums around the world as I travel, and just anybody who's inspired and shows their paintings like that, I'm intrigued by. I don't know if I have one that stands out. I'd like all of them.
And then
great masterpiece. Anybody who demonstrates mastery inspires me.
Fantastic. And then lastly, favorite philosopher, and one sentence that you would, if you could have your one message put on a billboard anywhere in the world, what would it be? So favorite philosopher and one message that you would say, more people should know this, or it would be great if people knew this.
I don't know if I have one. I just finished writing a book that has over 300 philosophers in it. And I can't say that there's any one that goes, wow. I loved Herbert Spencer. I loved, the wisdom of Socrates and Plato's writings. I mean, I like them all. I can't say there's one that stands out. Marcus Aurelius was one. I mean, even Einstein, I loved his teachings. I don't have one person. I've been standing on thousands of philosophers through the ages. But my favorite quote would be that no matter what you've done or not done, you're worthy of love. Quit comparing yourself to others and compare your daily actions only to what you value most, and prioritize your life and liberate yourself by delegating to others what is not inspiring to you, but is inspiring to them, to give job opportunities, to help the economy, and to set you free to do what you really love.
Dr. Demartini, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to be able to be with us today. I hope I get a chance to talk to you and interview you again for a part 2 somewhere out in the future, because it's been so rewarding.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Please, let's do it again. Thank you so much for this. And yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.